Greetings to you all. Welcome to today's teaching. The Man Beneath Legion. We often hear this described as the story of the demon-possessed man. But before we decide what the demons were, what the swine represented, or why Jesus crossed the water, let us begin with the person at the center of the account. Let's begin with the man. Because Legion departed, but the man remained. The many voices disappeared, but the man remained. And when the people arrived, they found him sitting, clothed, and in his right mind. So our central question today is not merely who was Legion. It is who was the human being beneath Legion. He said, "My name is Legion, for we are many." But was Legion truly his name? Or had so many wounds, fears, labels, memories, appetites, and destructive conclusions govern him that he could no longer distinguish himself from his condition? Jesus did not destroy the man. He separated the man from what had been destroying him. And that distinction is the doorway into today's investigation. Truth does not confuse the person with the pattern governing them. This story will take us from the tombs to a right mind, from a right mind to one's own house, and from personal restoration to public evidence. We will ask why the community feared the man's restoration, why the pattern sought entrance into the swine, and why Jesus told the restored man to return to his own house. We will also examine how this account connects with prayer and fasting, the danger of a house being swept but left empty, and the importance of replacing an old government with renewed consciousness. But we will not begin with fear. We will not begin with inherited images. We will begin with observation. Because this may not be a story about a distant man living among ancient tombs. It may reveal what happens whenever wounds begin speaking as identity. Accumulated voices become an inward government, and truth enters the territory to recover the human being beneath them all. So hold this question as we begin. What have I mistaken for my name? Simply because it has governed me for a long time. Did you get the question? What have I mistaken for my name? Simply because it has governed me for a long time. Let's begin. Luke 8, verse 27. Get your Bibles, okay? Luke 8, verse 27. It says, "And when he went forth to land, there met him out of the city a certain man, which had devils long time, and wear no clothes, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs." Every detail is already describing the man's inner condition before Jesus says a word. Let's begin with when he went forth to land. The previous scene takes place upon the water during a storm. If water or the sea represents the emotional and subconscious realm, Jesus has just demonstrated authority over inner turbulence. He said, "Peace, be still." Then Luke tells us, they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, and when he went forth to land. This movement matters. Jesus emerges from unstable waters and steps onto land, which is firm ground, stability, something capable of supporting weight. Truth has crossed the troubled emotional realm and arrived upon stable ground. Yet the moment truth reaches the land, it encounters a man who has no inner stability of his own. Jesus stands upon land, but the man has been living among tombs. The land announces what truth is bringing him towards stability. Remember, Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So Jesus represents the fullness of truth. Remember, Jesus reflects the Father's nature. So here, Jesus represents truth. Next, there met him out of the city. A city is a collection. It is not one house, one street, or one person. It is a guarded system of dwellings, activities, relationships, customs, authorities, and shared patterns. Symbolically, the city represents the collective arrangement of consciousness, the community of thoughts, beliefs, memories, influences, relationships, and systems within which identity functions. But Luke says this man came out of the city. He originated from the collective environment, yet he was no longer able to dwell within it. Whatever governed him had separated him from ordinary participation, relationship, community, and belonging. This is precisely what entrenched bondage can do. The pattern may arise from the city, but when it takes possession of the self-concept, it drives the person away from meaningful participation in the city. The man is physically near society, but unable to live within it. He has come from the city, but he no longer experiences himself as belonging within it. Next, a certain man. Man represents the active self-concept, the identity through which thought becomes choice, movement, behavior, and expression. So Luke is not merely describing something surrounding the man. He is showing us something that has taken control of the active principle itself. So this is not about gender. It's about humanity. So anyone can find themselves here because it's not about gender. Their destructive mindsets. Remember, I said devils are not imaginary beings. Okay, the devil is not a red-horned being. They are symbolic. Devils symbolize destructive mindsets or demons. Destructive mindsets. So their destructive mindsets have moved beyond suggestion. They are now governing how he perceives himself, where he dwells, what he wears, how he relates to others, how he responds to restraint, where he is driven, and what speaks through him. That is possession in practical language. We still use similar language today. We say, fear possessed him. Rage took over. She was consumed by jealousy. The addiction controls his life. I did not feel like myself. Something came over me. Usually when we do something and we don't want to accept accountability, what do we say? The devil made me do it. So if you did the wrong thing and you are saying the devil made me do it, then who is the devil here? Not a red-horned being, you. In that moment, you are operating from a mindset, a destructive mindset. The mindset you are operating from opposes truth. So here, we are describing a condition in which a pattern has seized the faculties that should serve the person's wholeness. Possession is what happens when a pattern is no longer merely experienced by the self, but begins governing the self. What you are supposed to have dominion over is rather dominating you. This does not mean the man has ceased to exist beneath the condition. The entire story proves otherwise. When the governing bondage is removed, the true person becomes visible again. Next, which had devils long time? The word long is essential. This is not a passing thought, a momentary temptation, or one difficult emotional episode. It is an entrenched government, something repeated, reinforced, inhabited, and obeyed until it has acquired authority through familiarity. A mindset gains strength when it is continually believed, rehearsed, fed, defended, obeyed, normalized, and incorporated into identity. That is why some kinds do not live through one inspirational statement. The longer a pattern has governed a person, the more areas of life may have been organized around it. For instance, A gambling addiction may involve money, secrecy, relationships, routines, digital access, emotional escape, social cycles, and the expectation of sudden rescue. A substance addiction may involve the body, environment, trauma, relationships, withdrawal, shame, and established pathways of coping. Truth must therefore do more than condemn the visible behavior. It must illuminate the structure sustaining it. The demon is not the person. The demon is the governing pattern that has occupied the person's faculties and mindset, destructive patterns. And the words long time invite compassion. Jesus does not ask why the man did not simply make better choices. He recognizes that a deeply established condition requires liberation, restoration, and a new place of dwelling. Next, and wore no clothes. Clothing represents identity, the visible expression in which the self appears and through which it is recognized. Scripture repeatedly uses clothing this way: garments of salvation, robes of righteousness, filthy garments removed, the new man put on, Christ put on, shame associated with nakedness. The man's nakedness reveals more than the absence of fabric. He has been stripped of a stable identity. He is exposed. He is unprotected. He no longer knows how to present himself within the community. The governing patterns have taken so much from him that his condition has become what others see first. They do not see a son, neighbor, citizen, or human being. They see the possessed man. This still happens today. We reduce people to their bondage. We say the addict, the alcoholic, the unstable one, the gambler, the problem child, the homeless man. The condition becomes their clothing because it becomes the identity by which society recognizes them. And sometimes the identity by which they recognize themselves. But the story later said that the man was found clothed. That means liberation does not merely stop destructive behavior. It restores identity. Truth does not merely remove what governed you. Truth clothes you again in the identity bondage had stripped away. Next, neither abode in any house. A house is a dwelling place, foundation, lineage, interior structure, and governing order. We are called the house or temple of God because the divine nature is meant to dwell and operate within us. But this man abode not in any house. He has no settled inner dwelling. He cannot remain within a structure that protects, orders, and supports life. His condition repeatedly drives him out of every stable habitation. This is what bondage does. It makes rest difficult. The person may have a physical building, but no inward home. They may live with family, but remain psychologically displaced. They may enter supportive environments, yet feel compelled to flee from them. They may receive help, but return to the familiar pattern because bondage has become more familiar than freedom. A house is more than somewhere the body sleeps. It is the governing foundation within which identity can safely dwell. The man has no house because the opposing mindsets have displaced him from his own interior sanctuary. He is alive, but he is not at home within himself. Next, but in the tombs. Tombs are places of concealment, darkness, uncertainty, memory, and association with what has ended but has not yet been released. A tomb contains what is no longer living, yet remains enclosed and preserved. That is a profound picture of a person dwelling among dead identities, buried memories, unresolved pain, expired beliefs, suppressed emotions, and conclusions that should no longer govern the present. He lives where things are hidden. He dwells among what has been buried. He has made his habitation within darkness and uncertainty because he no longer possesses a house of living identity. When the self is displaced from its living temple, it may begin dwelling among buried things. The tomb may be an old wound continually revisited, shame over a former decision, an identity formed through childhood rejection, grief that was never processed, a religious fear preserved long after its assumptions were questioned, a failed relationship that still governs new relationships, a past version of the self that consciousness has not released. The tragedy is not merely that dead things exist, it is that the living man is dwelling among them. The tomb is meant to contain what has ended. It is not meant to become the home of the living. Jesus does not enter the tomb to condemn the man for being there. Truth enters the place of concealment to call the living self out from among dead identities. The entire first verse reveals the condition. Before the dialogue begins, Luke has already given us the full diagnosis. Out of the city, meaning separated from collective belonging. A certain man, meaning the active self-concept has been affected. Devils a long time, meaning opposing patterns have become entrenched. Wore no clothes, meaning identity has been stripped away. Abode in no house, meaning the self has no stable inner dwelling. Lived in the tombs, meaning consciousness inhabits concealment, uncertainty, and dead identities. This is not the description of an evil man. It is the description of a displaced man. And that distinction will govern the entire teaching. Jesus does not arrive to destroy the man. He arrives to distinguish the man from what has been governing him. That is what truth does. Truth says, you are not the addiction. You are not the compulsion. You are not the rage. You are not the fear. You are not the shame. You are not the buried identity. You are the living one who has been dwelling among tombs. Let's look at Luke 8:27 in everyday life. Someone trapped in drug addiction may gradually become separated from family and friends, stable housing, employment and financial stability, counseling or treatment, community and accountability, and eventually their former sense of identity. They may refuse therapy, resist family support, leave structured environments, and choose isolation. Not because they consciously desire homelessness or loneliness, but because the addiction resists whatever threatens its authority. The person may desire freedom, while the pattern governing them resists the conditions freedom requires. The same pattern appears beyond substance addiction. A person governed by bitterness may continually rehearse the injury, interpret every correction as an attack, reject reconciliation, and eventually wonder why everyone has withdrawn. Bitterness promises protection, but produces isolation. A person governed by rage may drive away every relationship that once offered love. A person governed by suspicion may reject every trustworthy person. A person governed by pride may refuse counsel because receiving help feels like admitting weakness. A person governed by shame may hide from the very people willing to support them. This is how someone moves symbolically from the city, away from the house, out of their clothing, and into the tombs. The city represents shared life. The house represents stable dwelling. The clothing represents identity. The tombs represent concealment, darkness, isolation, and living among what should have been laid to rest. The tombs also describe how isolation becomes a hiding place. The person no longer has to confront how their behavior affects others. They can remain surrounded by their pain, old memories, resentment, cravings, and private conclusions without allowing another voice to challenge them. Every destructive inner government eventually separates the self from healthy dwelling. Addiction may separate a person from family. Bitterness may empty a person's relationships. Shame may drive them into hiding. And pride may make them refuse assistance. The tombs are not merely where the man lived. They reveal where every unchallenged bondage eventually leads into isolation, concealment, and communion with what no longer carries life. Verse 28. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and with a loud voice said, "What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not." Notice the contradiction within the response. He recognizes Jesus. He acknowledges the authority Jesus carries. He falls before him. Yet he still begs truth not to disturb him. This is not ignorance. Something within him recognizes truth. But the government operating through him resists what that truth will require. Recognition does not immediately produce acceptance. Sometimes, recognition produces resistance because truth threatens the pattern we have learned to protect. Next, what have I to do with thee? This is the language of separation. The person says things like, "What does your truth have to do with my life? Why are you interfering with my choices? Leave me alone. This is simply who I am. I am not ready to change. Stop judging me. I can handle it myself." Someone may know that their gambling is destroying their finances, yet become angry when their spouse raises the subject. Someone may know that drugs are separating them from their family, yet reject counseling because counseling threatens the addiction's continued access. Someone may recognize that bitterness is poisoning every relationship, yet resist the friend who asked them to release the injury. Someone may know that a religious assumption cannot withstand careful examination, yet become defensive when evidence challenges it. Their discomfort does not mean the truth is false. Sometimes, discomfort arises because truth has reached the precise place where the false government has established itself. Next, I beseech thee, torment me not. Bondage interprets liberation as torment. The addiction says, if you remove this substance, I will suffer. Bitterness says, if I release this injury, they will have escaped accountability. Pride says, if I admit I need help, I will lose my dignity. Fear says, If I leave what is familiar, I will no longer be safe. A false belief says, if I question this, my entire world may collapse. Therefore, the very process intended to restore the person initially feels like punishment. Withdrawal may feel painful. Accountability may feel embarrassing. Therapy may uncover memories that had been concealed. Boundaries may feel restrictive. Apologizing may humble the ego. Releasing bitterness may feel like surrendering one's defense. But the discomfort of liberation is not the same as distraction. Truth is not tormenting the person. Truth is disturbing the government that has been tormenting the person. This is why the voice speaking must be distinguished carefully. The living self may desire freedom, while the entrenched pattern resists the conditions required for freedom. The person says, I want my family back. I want peace. I want stability. I am tired of living this way. But the pattern says, do not take away what comforts me. Do not challenge my explanations. Do not expose what I have hidden. Do not make me change. One human being can experience both movements simultaneously. The loud voice reveals inner resistance. Luke says he cried out with a loud voice. The volume does not prove the pattern is correct. It reveals how strongly it reacts when its authority is threatened. We see this today. A calm observation may produce a disproportionate response because the words touch something the person has been defending. Maybe you care about someone. They are going through destructive patterns. And you say, you have been drinking more lately. This gambling is affecting the household. Your bitterness is pushing everyone away. Perhaps you should speak with a counselor. Let us examine whether this belief is actually consistent. The statement may be offered with compassion, yet the response becomes loud, defensive, accusatory, or evasive. Why? Because truth did not merely reach the ears, it reached the government. The stronger our identity has become attached to a pattern, the more correction can feel like an attack upon the self. That is why Jesus' work is so important. Truth separates the person from the condition. It does not say you are the addiction. It reveals this addiction is governing you, but it is not your deepest identity. Next, he falls before the truth he resists. This may be the most revealing detail. The man falls before Jesus, while simultaneously asking Jesus to leave him alone. Symbolically, something within him already recognizes the supremacy of truth, even while the old government resists surrender. the addiction, the behavior, the mindset resists surrender. That is often the beginning of awakening. You say, I know this is true, but I do not like what it reveals. I recognize the pattern, but I am not ready to release it. I understand what must change, but change frightens me. I see that this belief is inconsistent, but it has supported my identity for years. The falling represents recognition. The crying out represents resistance. The plea against torment reveals fear of transformation. Verse 28 captures the inner conflict between the self that recognizes truth and the entrenched government that fears what truth will remove. And this explains why compassion is necessary. Resistance does not always mean the person secretly loves destruction. They may be frightened of life without the pattern that has governed, comforted, protected, or defined them for a long time. Truth must therefore be firm without becoming humiliating. It exposes the bondage while preserving the dignity of the person beneath it. The verse is saying, when truth first confronts an entrenched pattern, liberation may be interpreted as interference, accountability as judgment, withdrawal as torment, and correction as attack. Yet the intensity of the resistance may reveal that truth has reached the very government that must be displaced for the person to become free. Verse 29. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For oftentimes it had caught him. And he was kept bound with chains and in fetters. And he brake the bands and was driven of the devil into the wilderness. If Jesus represents truth expressed through love, wisdom, justice, compassion, and integrity, then commanding the unclean spirit to leave the man represents truth directly confronting the pattern that has been governing him. Truth is in all of us. We all know what is true and what opposes true. Truth is in all of us. So in practical life, that command may sound like, this addiction is destroying your health. That is you speaking truth to someone. Your gambling is threatening your family's stability. Truth addressing a problem. Your bitterness is driving away those who love you. This behavior is not your identity, but it cannot continue governing you. You need treatment, accountability, and a different environment. The command is not necessarily someone standing over another person and shouting at an invisible being. It may be truthful counsel that identifies the destructive government, separates it from the person, and calls the person back into freedom. Therapy, counseling, education, intervention, loving correction, and honest conversation can all become expressions of the command, come out of the man. Truth addresses the pattern, not the person's worth. This distinction is essential. Jesus does not command the man to come out of himself. He commands the unclean spirit to come out of the man. The man is not the problem to be expelled. The destructive government is. The destructive mindset, the destructive pattern. That is how healthy therapy and counseling work. A counselor helps the person distinguish between their deepest identity and the patterns operating within them. They may say, you are not your addiction. You are not your trauma. You are not your intrusive thoughts. You are not your bitterness. You are not the shame attached to what happened to you. These things may be influencing you, but they do not constitute the totality of who you are. That is precisely what Jesus is doing symbolically. Truth separates the captive from the captivity. Condemnation identifies the person with the condition. Truth identifies the condition so the person can be liberated from it. The command may arrive through many vessels because truth lives in all of us. It may be a therapist helping someone understand the trauma beneath an addiction. A counselor identifying destructive thought patterns. A physician explaining what substance use is doing to the body. A recovery group providing accountability. A family member establishing a necessary boundary. A friend compassionately confronting bitterness. A teacher offering truthful information. A book, documentary, testimony, or support resource creating understanding. Or the individual finally speaking truth to the pattern within themselves. You speaking to yourself, I need to change. This behavior must stop. I need to change. I need help. That is truth confronting the situation. The authority is not in a religious performance. The authority is in the truth being communicated and embodied. Anyone helping a person recognize, confront, and become free from a destructive government is participating in the liberating office represented by Jesus. Truth is not limited to a person. Truth is in all of us. So anyone helping a person recognize, confront, and become free from a destructive mindset is participating in the liberating office represented by Jesus. Next, he had commanded. The command also shows that truth does not negotiate with what is destroying the person. Compassion toward the captive does not require accommodation of the captivity. A therapist may empathize deeply with why an addiction developed, while still saying clearly, this behavior must stop. A family may understand someone's trauma while refusing to fund their gambling or substance use. a friend may love someone while refusing to accept continued abuse. Truth can understand the origin of a behavior without granting it permanent authority. Love embraces the person while commanding the destructive pattern to relinquish its government. This is not cruelty, it is clarity. Next, for oftentimes it had caught him. Luke now explains why the command was necessary. The pattern repeatedly seized him. The word oftentimes describes recurrence. The man may have experienced brief periods of stability, but the condition caught him again. This resembles what we now call a cycle. A trigger appears. The craving, thought, or emotion intensifies. The person returns to the behavior. Temporary relief follows. Shame, damage, or isolation increases. The person resolves to stop. Then another trigger restarts the pattern. This is why truthful counseling does not examine only the visible incident. It investigates the recurring structure. What catches you? When does it catch you? What emotion precedes it? What environment feeds it? What belief justifies it? What relief does it temporarily provide? What must replace it if you are to remain free? Jesus will soon ask, "What is thy name?" That question is therapeutic in its precision. Before transformation can be sustained, the governing pattern must be brought into the light and accurately named. For healing to happen, you should be able to name the destructive pattern. This is gambling. This is bitterness. This is unforgiveness. If you can name it, you can heal from it. Next, the chains restrained him, but they did not heal him. The city had already attempted a solution. He was kept bound with chains and in fetters. They could see the dangerous behavior, but their answer was external restraint. Chains may represent rules, punishments, restrictions, confinement, consequences, or attempt to control behavior without understanding what produces it. Sometimes, restraint is necessary for immediate safety. Families may restrict access to money. Courts may impose conditions. Treatment centers may provide controlled environments. Hospitals may intervene during a crisis. But Luke shows us that restraint alone was insufficient. He broke the bands. The city tried to control the body, but truth came to address the government operating within the mind. Chains may interrupt an action, but they cannot by themselves transform the pattern producing it. You can take away the gambling app, but if the desperation, fantasy, emotional escape, and distorted beliefs remain, the person may find another way to gamble. You can remove access to one substance, but if the trauma, environment, cravings, and coping mechanisms remain unaddressed, another dependency may emerge. You can force someone to remain in a relationship, but you cannot create inward reconciliation through restraint. You can silence someone's questions, but you cannot produce understanding by command. External boundaries can create space for healing, but they are not the whole of healing. Next, driven into the wilderness. This is the consequence of an unaddressed inner government. It continually drives the person away from stable dwelling and shared life. The man is not moving with conscious direction. He is being driven. That is what people often mean when they say, I promised myself I would stop, but I did it again. I knew what would happen, but I could not resist. I pushed everyone away, even though I did not want to be alone. I became angry before I understood what was happening. The wilderness represents isolation, uncertainty, instability, and life outside cultivated order. The destructive pattern takes the person where they did not consciously intend to go. For example, gambling drives someone into financial wilderness. Substance dependence may drive someone into homelessness and separation. Bitterness may drive someone into relational isolation. Pride may drive someone away from counsel. Shame may drive someone into concealment. Fear may drive someone away from every opportunity that could restore confidence. The pattern promises relief, protection, or control, but repeatedly drives the person further from their house, identity, relationships, and stability. Verses 28 and 29 belong together. Verse 28 gives us the initial resistance. Torment me not. Verse 29 reveals what produced that reaction. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. You want the person to stop that habit. You care for them. You want them to stop it. Now the sequence becomes beautifully clear. Truth approaches. The person recognizes it. The entrenched pattern interprets correction as torment. Truth identifies what has been governing the person. Truth commands that government to release its hold. The history of repeated capture is examined. The failure of external restraint is exposed. The person begins moving toward inward restoration. This is precisely how counseling may feel at first. Someone enters therapy asking for relief, but becomes uncomfortable when the counselor identifies the pattern that must change. They may resist, become defensive, stop attending, or say the therapist is judging them. Yet, their discomfort may arise because therapy has reached the very thing that repeatedly catches and drives them. Verse 28 is resistance to the diagnosis. Verse 29 is truth beginning the treatment. And the command, come out of the man, becomes a powerful declaration. This addiction is operating within you, but it is not you. This bitterness has influenced your choices, but it is not your identity. This trauma has affected your life, but it does not own your future. This pattern has caught you repeatedly, but it does not possess the final authority over you. Jesus is not performing religious theater. He is demonstrating how truth liberates. It approaches society as isolated, distinguishes the person from the condition, names the governing pattern, confronts it directly, and begins restoring the person whom restraint alone could never heal. That's what truth does. Therapy helps us see what has been governing us. Counseling gives language to what we could not name. Truth separates our identity from the condition. Disciplined alignment helps establish a new government. And compassionate support helps the restored person return from the tombs to the house and the city. Verse 30. And Jesus asked him, saying, What is thy name? And he said, Legion, because many devils were entered into him. If a name represents identity, nature, character, or the way something is known, then Jesus, the fullness and embodiment of truth, is asking, who do you believe yourself to be? What identity have you accepted? How do you presently see and define yourself? What name has this experience taught you to answer to? And look at the tragedy of the response. The man says Legion. The man answers truth with the name of what has been governing him. He does not give his personal name. He does not say, I am a man. I am a son. I am worthy of restoration. I am a member of this city. I am someone who needs help. He identifies himself by the multitude of destructive voices operating within him. That is precisely what people do today. We say, I am a failure. I am broken. I am worthless. I am unwanted. I am an addict. I am damaged. I am unlovable. I am too far gone. I am what happened to me. I will never change. The answer Legion reveals that the bondage has progressed from influencing his behavior to defining his identity. Many voices have become one name. A legion is not one voice. It is a multitude acting as a coordinated government. That means the man's answer may represent an entire collection of conclusions. You are worthless. Nobody wants you. You cannot change. You have failed too many times. You do not belong in the city. You have no house to return to. You deserve to live among the tombs. This is simply who you are. Many voices. One painful experience may have produced another conclusion. That conclusion shaped another decision. The decision created consequences. The consequences reinforced shame. Shame produced isolation. Isolation strengthened the original belief. Eventually, There is not one destructive thought, but a whole system of them. One wound can gather many interpretations. Many interpretations can form a government. And that government can eventually become the name by which the person knows themselves. He is one man outwardly, but inwardly he answers as a multitude. This is why he was alone physically, but crowded psychologically. He had no people around him, yet many voices lived within him. He occupied no house, yet many destructive conclusions occupied him. He wore no clothes, yet legion had become the identity covering him. Truth is conducting an identity investigation. Jesus already knows that many devils are operating within the man. The question is not asked because truth lacks information. Like Adam, where are you? Of course, God knew where Adam was. It's asking you, where are you in consciousness? The question brings the governing identity into conscious expression. This resembles what happens in therapy or counseling. You are asked, what do you believe about yourself because of what happened? What do you call yourself when you fail? Whose voice do you hear when you feel worthless? When did you begin believing that you were unlovable? Are you describing what you experienced or defining who you are? Is that truly your identity, or is it a conclusion that entered you? It said many devils were entered into him. They were not his essential nature. They came into his experience through repeated thoughts, wounds, choices, influences, fears, teachings, relationships, or environments, and eventually spoke as though they were his identity. What entered you may influence you, but it did not create you. What governed you for a long time is still not your original name. This is why the words we attach to I am are so powerful. I am expresses identity. What follows it becomes the character we begin assigning to ourselves. We say things like, I failed because I am a failure. I experience rejection because I am unwanted. I made a destructive choice because I am worthless. I am experiencing addiction becomes I am nothing but an addict. I was wounded becomes I am permanently broken. The event becomes a conclusion. The conclusion becomes a name. The name becomes clothing. The clothing becomes behavior. The behavior produces an environment that appears to confirm the name. That may explain the man's entire condition. He is not merely living among tombs. His outer dwelling has become consistent with the inward name he has accepted. If he believes he is beyond restoration, he will dwell where restoration appears impossible. If he believes he does not belong, he will remain outside the city. If he believes he has no worthy identity, he will wear no clothes. If he believes he is only his condition, he will answer truth with the condition's name. Jesus does not accept legion as the man's final identity. This is the beauty of the encounter. Jesus asks the name, but he does not affirm the false identity. Truth allows the bondage to identify itself so that it can be distinguished from the man. Truth asks, "What is your name?" Bondage answers, "I am what has happened to me." Truth responds by separating what entered the person from who the person truly is. Jesus does not expel the man, he expels what entered the man. The man remains. And once the opposing government is removed, Luke shows us the person beneath the name. He is clothed, seated, in his right mind, capable of learning, able to return home, able to reconnect with the city, and entrusted with purpose. That means legion was never the man's true identity. It was the temporary name of the government occupying his consciousness. The restored man is evidence that the identity he confessed was not the total truth about him. This makes the final restoration even more powerful. At the beginning, the man's identity is so fragmented that he cannot give Jesus his own name. At the end, he is restored sufficiently to become a witness. The story moves from "my name is what governs me" to "my testimony is what truth has restored in me." Jesus is not only casting out devils, a mindset. Truth is correcting the man's answer to the question, "Who are you?" The destructive voices say, "You are legion. You are the addiction. You are the bitterness. You are the failure. You are the shame. You are the buried past." But the restoration declares, "You are the living man beneath the multitude. You are not what entered you. You are not what repeatedly caught you. You are not the tomb in which you dwelt. You are not the identity bondage taught you to confess. You can be clothed again. You can return to your house. You can participate in the city again. You can become a messenger of freedom." This gives us a powerful central statement for verse 30. When Jesus asks, "What is thy name?" truth is confronting identity. The man answers legion because he has learned to define himself by the multitude of destructive beliefs governing him. Just as people today say, "I am broken," "I am worthless," or "I am a failure," he attaches his identity to his condition. But the story reveals that legion entered the man. Legion did not create the man. Truth names the bondage, separates it from the person, and restores the living identity concealed beneath it. And perhaps the deepest line is the fact that something speaks through you, does not mean it speaks truthfully about you. Verse 31. And they besought him that he will not command them to go out into the deep. This verse reveals something profound about entrenched patterns. The opposing mindsets know they cannot remain within the man once truth has exposed them. But they still resist being sent into the deep, the abyss, the place where they can no longer operate through a living expression. The issue is no longer whether they will leave. The issue is, where will their displaced pattern go? And will it find another vessel through which to continue expressing itself? Next, they besought him. The devils are now pleading. At first, the governing pattern spoke boldly through the man. What have I to do with thee? But when confronted by the authority of truth, its apparent power begins to collapse. This resembles what happens when a destructive mindset is finally exposed. Before examination, it speaks as though it possesses unquestionable authority. This is just who you are. You will never change. You need this to survive. Nobody understands you. There is no other way. But once truth begins investigating it, the pattern must defend itself. The person says things like, do not take this coping mechanism away. Do not make me confront that memory. Do not ask me to forgive. Do not make me accept responsibility. Do not challenge the belief that has protected me. If I release this, what will I have left? The voice that once commanded the person is now begging truth for permission to remain active somehow. A false government appears powerful while it remains unexamined. Once truth exposes it, its dependence upon the person becomes visible. Next, that he would not command them. Again, Luke emphasizes the command. Truth is not merely suggesting that the man reconsider his condition. Truth is removing the false partner's authority to occupy and define him. Healthy counseling may compassionately investigate why a pattern developed. But compassion does not mean permitting that pattern to remain in government. A counselor may say, I understand why you learned to withdraw, but isolation cannot continue governing your relationships. A family may say, we understand that you are struggling, but we will no longer finance the addiction. A friend may say, I love you, but I cannot continue participating in conversation built entirely upon bitterness. The command represents a decisive boundary. You may have entered this person, but you do not possess the right to remain. Next, to go out into the deep. The word translated deep refers to the abyss, a depth without stable form, foundation, or embodied expression. Earlier, Jesus came through the turbulent waters and stepped onto land. Land represented stability, something established, visible, and capable of bearing expression. The deep represents the opposite. No stable ground, no established dwelling, no organized identity, no human faculties through which the pattern can act, no structure through which it can continue reproducing itself. Symbolically, the devil's fear becoming unembodied possibilities, thoughts without agreement, impulses without obedience, beliefs without identification, and patterns without expression. A destructive belief may appear powerful, but it requires participation. Bitterness needs someone to rehearse the injury. Addiction needs someone to continue feeding the craving. Shame needs someone to accept its accusations. Fear needs someone to obey its predictions. A false religious assumption needs people to repeat and defend it. The pattern has no living expression unless it finds consciousness willing to house, nourish, and embody it. That is why it does not want to enter the deep. In the abyss, it loses the man's body, voice, identity, choices, relationships, resources, and active participation. The pattern itself is not a person, it's a mindset. It has been operating through the person. Once separated from the man, it requires another embodiment if it is to continue expressing itself. The central revelation of verse 31. The devils fear the abyss because an opposing mindset cannot govern without somewhere to dwell. It needs a mind to believe it, an identity to wear it, a body to enact it, a voice to repeat it, and an environment to sustain it. But when truth separates the living person from the false identity, the pattern loses its house. The man had been without a house because the destructive patterns had made him their house. Truth comes to restore the man to his own dwelling and deprive the false government of the human faculties it had occupied. Verse 32. And there was there an herd of many swine feeding on the mountain. And they besought him that he would suffer them to enter into them. And he suffered them. This verse here takes us back to Leviticus 11. We already established from it that the swine divides the hoof but does not chew the cud. It possesses one outward sign of discernment, the divided hoof, but lacks the inward process of reflection. It does not bring what it has consumed back up to examine it again. Therefore, the swine represents a mindset that receives information, but does not wrestle with it long enough to understand it. It hears, but does not reconsider. It consumes, but does not reflect. It divides things outwardly, but does not process them inwardly. And now, Luke tells us that these swine were feeding not in the valley, but on the mountain. That is astonishing. The mountain represents elevated awareness. Throughout scripture, it is associated with ascent, revelation, enlarged perspective, divine instruction, and elevated consciousness. Moses ascends the mountain to receive the law. Jesus teaches from a mountain. He is transfigured upon a mountain. Isaiah speaks of the mount of the Lord's house being exalted. The disciples ascend to receive a clear revelation of Jesus. From an elevated place, one sees what cannot be seen from below. The mountain represents a level of awareness from which the individual should be able to perceive more clearly. Yet the animals feeding there are swine. Luke is showing us that merely occupying an elevated place does not guarantee an elevated mind. You can feed upon elevated truth while remaining unwilling to reflect upon what you consume. A person may read scripture daily, listen to profound teachings, attend therapy, receive wise advice, occupy a respected spiritual position, possess extensive education, speak the language of awakening, and still refuse to chew the cud. They receive truth on the mountain, but process it with the nature represented by the swine. Feeding is not the same as understanding. The swine were feeding, they were consuming something. But Leviticus has already given us the key. They do not return to what they have consumed for further reflection. This is the mindset that says, I heard the verse, so I understand it. I read the chapter once, so I know what it means. My pastor said it, so I do not need to investigate it. This is what I have always believed. The first explanation sounds right, so why question it? The counselor gave me advice, but I do not want to examine myself. I watched one video, and now I have reached my conclusion. The clean animal does not merely consume, it returns to what it consumed. Symbolically, it asks, it's a mindset. What did I hear? What assumptions did I bring to it? Does my interpretation fit the entire chapter? Does it agree with the current pattern across scripture? What does this reveal about me? Is my first conclusion actually true? What must I reconsider? Chewing the cud is the inward discipline of refusing to let the first impression become the final conclusion. The swine mindset skips that process. The swine divide the hoof, but do not chew the cud. The hoof is divided, suggesting the outward ability to distinguish between things. But because the swine does not chew the cud, its distinctions are not grounded in careful inward reflection. It divides too quickly, clean or unclean, saved or lost, believer or unbeliever, good person or bad person, right or wrong, friend or enemy, success or failure. It can separate categories, but it does not revisit the evidence. It reaches a conclusion and then searches only for information that confirms it. That is not mature discernment. It is judgment without adequate reflection. The divided hoof, without chewing the cud, represents the appearance of discernment without the inward discipline required to discern truthfully. And that makes the bound location even more revealing. These are not ignorant mindsets with no access to truth. They are mindsets feeding within an environment of elevated knowledge, while refusing the reflective process that elevation requires. The opposing patterns recognize a compatible nature. The destructive mindsets ask permission to enter the swine because the swine represents a compatible vessel. The same patterns that govern the man cannot remain in him once truth separates them from his identity. Therefore, they seek another consciousness or another mode of thought through which they can continue operating. And what kind of mindset is most vulnerable? One that does not reflect, one that does not investigate, one that reacts immediately, one that consumes without properly digesting, one that accepts the first fear, accusation, craving, or conclusion that enters awareness. A thought that cannot survive careful examination will always prefer a mind that refuses to examine it. Bitterness needs someone who will not reconsider the injury from another perspective. Addiction needs someone who will not reflect upon where temporary relief repeatedly leads. Pride needs someone who refuses to revisit their own behavior. Fear needs someone who accepts predictions without testing them. Religious manipulation needs people who repeat isolated verses without examining context. Shame needs someone who turns one failure into a permanent identity without questioning the conclusion. The devils seek the swine because unexamined consciousness gives destructive patterns somewhere new to feed. Advice can be heard without being reflected upon. This connects beautifully to therapy and counseling. Someone can attend therapy and still refuse to chew the cud. They may hear the counselor say, "Your bitterness is isolating you. Your childhood wound is shaping your current relationships. Your coping mechanism is harming your body. You continually define yourself by what happened to you. You must establish boundaries and new practices." But hearing counsel is not the same as inwardly processing it. The person may leave the session, become defensive, blame the counselor, or return immediately to the old behavior. The truth reached the mountain of awareness, but the swine mindset consumed it without reflection. Likewise, someone may hear a teaching that challenges a long-held religious assumption. Instead of examining the complete pattern, They react to one sentence, defend the inherited conclusion, and reject the teaching. They were present where elevated truth was being offered. But presence on the mountain did not automatically produce assent within consciousness. Therapy can provide the food, but the individual must participate in the digestion. Truth can present the evidence, but consciousness must be willing to wrestle with it. Next, they besought him. Their destructive patterns do not request just any dwelling. They request the swine. They recognize where their nature can continue operating. This shows us that patterns seek agreement through compatibility. A rumor enters most easily into a mind already inclined towards suspicion. An insult takes root most easily where insecurity is already established. A craving gains power where it is entertained rather than examined. A manipulative teaching spreads most easily through people who repeat without investigating. A false identity becomes established where painful conclusions are accepted without being questioned. What we refuse to examine becomes a possible dwelling place for what we should have discerned. The swine's vulnerability is not that it feeds. Its vulnerability is that it does not reflect upon what it feeds on. Next, and he suffered them. Jesus allows the patterns to enter the swine. This is not truth approving destruction. It is truth allowing the nature of the destructive government to become visible. While the patterns remained within the man, people could confuse the person with the condition. They could look at him and conclude, he is evil, he is dangerous, he is hopeless. This is simply his nature. But when the patterns leave the man and enter another vessel, Scripture demonstrates that the destructive movement was not the man's essential identity. The man remains, the pattern moves. That distinction is the heart of liberation. Whatever can leave you cannot be the deepest truth of who you are. And once the patterns enter the swine, their direction becomes unmistakable. The herd will rush from the mountain down into the lake and be choked. Truth permits the transfer because the next movement exposes what these unreflective patterns inevitably produce. The pattern in the verse. The whole verse can now be read inwardly. The mountain, elevated awareness, revelation, and enlarged perspective. The herd, a collective or multiplied pattern. The swine, mindsets that consume but do not reflect. Feeding, receiving information, teaching, advice, or experience. The devils entering them, destructive patterns finding agreement within unreflective consciousness. Jesus permitting it. Truth allowing the pattern's nature and destination to reveal themselves fully. Verse 33. Then went the devils out of the man and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep slope into the lake and were choked. The herd ran violently. The violence belongs to a destructive pattern, not to truth and not the restored man. Once legion enters a compatible and reflective consciousness, the herd immediately moves as one. No swine pauses. None examines their direction. None chews the cud. They are swept collectively by the same impulse. This is what happens when unexamined ideas govern a group. One person reacts, others imitate, emotion spreads, nobody verifies, and the whole collective rushes toward a destructive conclusion. The herd demonstrates the destination of consciousness that refuses reflection. What will not pause to reflect will eventually be driven by whatever enters it. Next, down a steep slope. Descent is not punishment. It is the lowering of what had exalted itself. The swine had been feeding on the mountain within elevated awareness. Yet, they did not possess the reflective nature required to remain there. Their descent exposes the instability hidden beneath their elevated position. The steep slope also communicates momentum. Once an unexamined pattern is collectively accepted, it can accelerate rapidly. Assumption becomes certainty. Certainty becomes reaction. Reaction becomes collective agreement. Collective agreement becomes destructive movement. Yet descent also contains the beginning of humility. What had occupied the mountain must come down. False conclusions, inflated identities, pride, and destructive government must be brought low before they can be dissolved. Truth brings every pattern down from the elevated position it falsely occupied. Next, into the lake. The lake is a body of water, a collective gathering into which many streams flow. Symbolically, it can represent a collective field of cleansing, exposure, emotional depth, or refinement. This briefly connects with the lake of fire. Fire refines, water cleanses. Together, the imagery does not describe eternal torture. It reveals a comprehensive purification in which falsehood cannot continue unchanged. The herd enters the lake collectively because the problem has become collective. Legion was many. The swine were a herd. The destructive movement must now encounter a cleansing that reaches the whole accumulated government. What entered one man as a multitude is carried into a collective refining process where the entire pattern is brought to its end. Next, and we're choked. This is especially revealing because choking ends the pattern's ability to breathe, speak, and reproduce itself. Legion had spoken through the man. It had used his voice to answer, "My name is Legion." But in the lake, that false government loses its breath and therefore loses its expression. It can no longer speak through the man, name the man, drive the man, reproduce itself through the herd, or continue governing another living expression. And because spirit is connected with breath, choking symbolically removes the animating force, sustaining the destructive pattern. The pattern that once spoke through the man is silent in the waters of cleansing. Next, they died. Death is the end of a form, government, cycle, or way of life. What dies here is not the restored man. It is the destructive pattern that had been destroying him. That distinction changes the entire story. The man does not die. His true identity does not die. His mind does not die. His future does not die. What reaches its end is the false name, the accumulated destructive government, the unreflective mode of consciousness, the pattern of violent reaction, and the force that really drove him into isolation. This is restorative judgment. Judgment identifies what cannot continue if life is to be restored. The devils leave, the swine descend, the herd is choked, the pattern ends, the man remains. And immediately afterward, we see the fruit. He is clothed, seated, and in his right mind. If this were merely a picture of destruction, the story would end with death. But it ends with a human being restored to identity, stability, relationship, and purpose. The death in the lake makes room for life in the man. That's why in the book of Revelation, after the refinement, we see a new Jerusalem, a new heaven, and a new earth. The verse can therefore be summarized like this. The devils represent the destructive thoughts that had become the man's government. The swine represents an unreflective mindset compatible with those thoughts. The herd represents their collective multiplication. Their violent descent exposes the inevitable movement of consciousness that reacts without reflection. The lake represents collective cleansing and refinement. Their choking removes the breath, voice, and expression of the destructive government, while death marks the end of the pattern, not the destruction of the person. What dies is the captivity. What remains is the man. And this gives us the clearest restorative contrast. Legion entered the lake, but the man returned to his life. That is restoration. Something must end for you to awaken. It mirrors every knee shall bow perfectly. Philippians 2:10 says that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things in earth and things under the earth. If the name of Jesus represents the nature, character, and authority of truth, that every knee bowing is every competing government being brought into submission to truth. At first, Legion stands as an exalted government within the man. It governs his identity, drives his behavior, speaks through his voice, separates him from his house, and keeps him among the tombs. But when truth appears, The entire government begins to bow. The devils besought Jesus. The authority they appear to possess over the man disappears in the presence of truth. Then the compatible swine descend from the mountain. They went down. Their physical descent is the visible bowing of the destructive patterns that had exalted themselves within consciousness. What had raised itself above the man's true identity is humbled. What had governed him must now submit. What had spoken, as though it possessed final authority, is brought beneath the government of truth. Every knee bows when every false identity, destructive conclusion, unreflective mindset, and opposing pattern loses the elevated position it occupied within us. And this also illuminates the continuation of Philippians 2:11, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. The story begins with Legion using the man's tongue to confess a false identity. My name is Legion. But the story ends with the restored man using his voice to declare what truth has done for him. His tongue passes from the government of Legion to the government of truth. That is the confession that Jesus Christ is Lord. Not repeating a religious sentence, but allowing truth to become the governing authority expressed through one's identity, mind, speech, and life. And look at the three realms Paul names. Things in heaven. Patterns occupying elevated awareness, like the swine on the mountain. Things on earth. Patterns embodied in human life, behavior, identity, and relationships. Things under the earth. Buried wounds, unconscious conclusions, tombs, and concealed inner government. Every level is brought under truth. Nothing remains outside its illumination. Not the exalted assumption, not the embodied habit, and not the buried wound. Every knee bowing is every level of consciousness yielding to truth. That is why the descent is restorative. The patterns do not bow, so the source can take pleasure in their suffering. They bow because nothing opposed to life can retain authority when truth is fully revealed. And once they descend into the lake, they are choked. The false government loses its breath, voice, and capacity to keep naming the man. The pattern that once forced the man to bow is now itself bowed before truth. Every knee bowed, but the man was not destroyed. What bowed was everything that prevented him from standing in his true identity. This is judgment as restoration. This is the lake as refinement. This is death as the end of the destructive pattern. And this is Jesus as Lord. Truth becoming the final governing authority within the person. Verse 34. When they that fed them saw what was done, they fled and went and told it in the city and in the country. The swine were not feeding themselves. There were people whose role was to keep them fed. Symbolically, these are the individuals, communities, platforms, relationships, institutions, and environments that continually supply destructive mindsets with the attention and reinforcement they need to grow. Legion entered a compatible mindset, but the keepers were sustaining that mindset. That is precisely what we see on social media. Hatred is fed through repeated outrage. Bitterness is fed through constant rehearsal of injury. Fear is fed through alarming content. Addiction is fed through normalization and easy access. Prejudice is fed through stereotypes and selective stories. Shame is fed through comparison. False religious assumptions are fed through repetition without investigation. The keepers may not have created the original wound, but they keep providing food to the conclusions that grew from it. What enters a person may begin as a thought, but what repeatedly fed can become a governing identity. And notice the full network. The devils represent destructive beliefs and patterns. The swine represent minds that consume without reflection. The herd represents collective agreement. The feeders represent those who reinforce and sustain the collective mindset. This is how a destructive pattern becomes cultural. One person introduces the accusation. Others consume it without examining it. And still, others keep supplying content that strengthens it. On social media, someone posts from bitterness. Others immediately agree. The algorithm notices the engagement and distributes it more widely. Influencers repeat it. Communities form around it. Soon, anger is no longer a passing emotion. It becomes a shared identity. The pattern speaks. The unreflective mind receives it. The herd multiplies it, and the feeders keep it alive. That makes their response to the restoration incredibly revealing. They saw what was done, but instead of celebrating that the man was free, they fled. Why? Because the end of the destructive pattern also exposed their relationship to it. If your influence, income, belonging, attention, authority, or identity depends upon keeping people angry, afraid, addicted, divided, or ashamed, then their restoration may feel like your loss. Some people do not simply observe hatred. Their platform is built upon feeding it. Some do not merely encounter bitterness. Their communities depend upon keeping injuries alive. Some do not simply discuss addiction. They profit from continuing the appetite. Some systems do not merely contain fear. They preserve their authority by continually producing it. Liberation threatens every system that benefits from captivity. This is why they did not first run to the man. They ran to report what happened to the herd. A human being had been restored, but their attention was drawn toward the collapse of the system they had been maintaining. They did not say, the man is free. He is in his right mind. He can return to his family. Their alarms centered upon what had been lost. That happens today. Someone heals from bitterness, but the group that bonded through bitterness says, "You have changed. You have forgotten what they did. You are defending the enemy. You are no longer one of us." Someone begins recovering from addiction, but their former cycle continually offers them the substance again because their sobriety confronts the group's shared behavior. Someone begins questioning fear-based teaching, but those who benefited from their fear interpret awakening as rebellion. Someone stops reacting to outrage content, and the platformers find another emotional trigger to regain their attention. The feeders need the herd to remain hungry. A destructive pattern cannot become collective without people willing to feed it. And those who feed it may resist the truth that brings it to an end. The word city and country also show how the report spreads through both organized and wider collective life. What occurred within one man now exposed an entire environment. His bondage was personal. The swine revealed compatible collective consciousness. The keepers revealed the sustaining system. The city and country revealed the larger society influenced by it. Truth did not merely heal an isolated individual. It uncovered the whole ecosystem surrounding his condition. And this is crucial. The feeders fled because they had just witnessed the end of what they were feeding. The lake did not only choke the destructive pattern, it interrupted the supply and consumption relationship supporting it. When truth ends a destructive appetite, it also exposes everyone who had been keeping that appetite fed. Verse 34 can be framed like this. Those who fed the swine represent the people and systems that nourish unreflective and destructive consciousness. Through repeated content, validation, access, fear, outrage, and social agreement, they help destructive patterns grow into collective identities. When truth brings the pattern to an end, the feeders flee because restoration exposes both what they were sustaining and what they might have gained from its continuation. And the deepest contrast is, the man had been starving for truth, while the destructive mindset surrounding him was being continually fed. Truth reversed the order. The pattern was deprived of expression. The man was restored to life. Verse 35. Then they went out to see what was done, and came to Jesus, and found the man out of whom the devils were departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Verse 35 is the visible evidence that everything preceding it was restorative. The man was not destroyed. His identity was not erased. His mind was not taken from him. What departed was the destructive government that had concealed the man beneath its many expressions. Now the people finally see him sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. This is what remains when legion is removed. They went out to see what was done. The feeders reported what happened, but the people now go out to examine it for themselves. This is important because they could have accepted the report without investigation. Yet Luke says they came to see. There is a movement from hearing to observation. What happened to the herd? What happened to the man? What did this truth actually produce? The fruit is standing before them, or more precisely, sitting before them. They do not find a destroyed human being. They find someone restored. This becomes the evidence by which the nature of Jesus' work should be evaluated. Truth is known by what it produces. If the intervention returns someone to stability, dignity, awareness, relationship, and purpose, then its fruit speaks truthfully about its nature. Jesus has already taught, wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. The restored man is the fruit. Next, they came to Jesus. They came toward the same truth that liberated the man. But physical proximity does not really mean inward agreement. Everyone in the scene can come near Jesus, yet respond differently. The man comes into alignment. The devils bow. The swine descend. The feeders flee. The people investigate. And later, the community asks Jesus to leave. Everyone encounters truth, but the condition of consciousness determines how that encounter is received. To the captive man, truth becomes liberation. To the destructive pattern, truth becomes judgment. To the unreflective mindset, truth exposes its instability. To the feeders, truth threatens what they were sustaining. To the restored consciousness, truth becomes a place of learning. Next, and found the man. Earlier, the community had merely encountered his condition, the nakedness, the crying, the tombs, the broken restraints, the violence, the isolation, the name legion. The pattern had become so visible that the person disappeared beneath it. But once the destructive government departs, the man can be found again. Truth did not create another man. Truth uncovered the man who had been hidden beneath the accumulated patterns. This is what restoration does. It separates the person from the addiction, separates the person from the trauma, separates the person from the diagnosis, separates the person from the failure, separates the person from the false identity, separates the person from the behavior that had come to define them. We can acknowledge what someone has done without declaring that the behavior is the reality of who they are. The man experienced legion, but legion was not his origin. The patterns entered him. Therefore, they were not the source from which he came. What entered the man departed. What came from the source remained. Next, out of whom the devils were departed. Luke repeats the distinction. The devils were not the man. They departed out of the man. This confirms that the destructive parts were occupants, not identity. The man had said, "My name is Legion." But the narrative corrects the identity without condemning the person. This is the man out of whom the devils departed. The man had identified himself by what governed him. But truth identified the government as something that could be separated from him. That is a compassionate work of discernment. You are experiencing fear, but fear is not your name. You developed an addiction, but addiction is not your origin. You acted from bitterness, but bitterness is not the totality of your being. You believed a destructive conclusion, but the conclusion can be examined and released. Truth holds us accountable for what has been expressed, without confusing the expression with our eternal identity. Next, sitting. Before truth arrived, the man was continually driven. He was restless. He moved between the tombs and the wilderness. He could not remain safely within a house. He was governed by an inner multitude, pulling him in many directions. Now he is sitting. Sitting represents rest, stability, self-government, receptivity, settled awareness, and the end of compulsive movement. The man is no longer being driven by every voice that enters consciousness. When the false government ends, the person no longer has to run according to its commands. This does not mean he has become passive. It means he has become settled enough to listen, learn, and choose consciously. Before, Legion produced movements without direction. Now truth produces stillness with purpose. Next, at the feet of Jesus. The restored man is not merely sitting anywhere. He is sitting at the feet of Jesus. Throughout scripture, sitting at someone's feet represents the posture of a disciple, someone willing to learn. Mary sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. Paul was taught at the feet of Gamaliel. The feet also represent work, conduct, and practical embodiment. Therefore, sitting at the feet of Jesus symbolizes placing oneself beneath the instruction of truth so that one's way of life can be retrained. The man has moved from being driven by an unexamined multitude to consciously learning the way of truth. This is exactly what the swine mindset will not do. The swine fed but did not reflect. The restored man sits and listens. The proof that Legion has departed is not merely that the man has stopped crying. He has developed a new relationship with truth. Healing is not only the absence of the old pattern, it is the establishment of a new governing posture. Next, clothes. Earlier, the man wore no clothes. His nakedness represented exposure, vulnerability, and the loss of a stable identity. Everything buried within him had become publicly visible through his behavior. Now he is clothed. Clothing throughout scripture often represents identity, consciousness, character, and the nature we embody. We see garments of salvation, the robe of righteousness, putting on the new man, putting on Christ, being clothed with humility, being clothed upon with our heavenly dwelling. The man receives more than external fabric. He is clothed with a restored sense of self. He is no longer wearing his condition as his identity. Before, his life expressed, I am legion. I am what happened to me. I am the voices governing me. I am beyond restoration. Now his visible life begins to express dignity, order, and renewed identity. The clothing reveals that restoration has moved from within to without. The inward change is becoming visible through the man's outward presentation and way of life. Next, in his right mind. This may be the clearest description of restoration in the entire passage. He is in his right mind, not someone else's mind, not a mind imposed upon him, his right mind. The word right points towards soundness, sobriety, balance, and self-control. The man's mental faculties are no longer divided among the many voices of legion. He can now observe, reflect, discern, listen, evaluate, choose, and govern himself. Legion represented fragmentation, many voices, many conclusions, many impulses, many competing identities. The right mind represents integration. The many no longer rule the one. Restoration is the return of consciousness to a sound governing center. And this beautifully connects with Paul. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:16, but we have the mind of Christ. The mind of Christ is not an inability to think for ourselves. It is consciousness aligned with truth, love, wisdom, mercy, discernment, and the nature of the source. So now he is in his right mind. He has the mind of Christ. This man is no longer thinking from the tombs, from expired identities, buried wounds, and concealed pain. He is learning to perceive from the nature represented by Jesus. Next, and they were afraid. This is perhaps the most revealing part of the verse. They were not afraid while the man lived among the tombs. They had adapted to that. They had developed systems for restraining him. They knew how to respond when he broke the chains. They had become familiar with their destructive pattern. But when they see him restored, they are afraid. Why would a clothed, peaceful, and sound-minded man frighten them more than the man who could not be restrained? Because familiar bondage can feel safer than unfamiliar freedom. The community knew how to manage its captivity. They did not know what its restoration would require them to reconsider. His healing raises uncomfortable questions. What if we misunderstood him? What if what we called his nature was actually a condition? What if our restraints never addressed the root? What if the system we maintained was feeding the very consciousness destroying him? What else among us must now change? A restored person becomes evidence against every system that had accepted their captivity as permanent. This is why communities sometimes resist someone's transformation. When the bitter person releases the injury, the group bonded through shared resentment may become uncomfortable. When someone leaves an addiction, former companions may feel judged by their sobriety. When a person begins questioning inherited assumptions, those who built their identity upon certainty may call discernment rebellion. When someone establishes boundaries, people who benefited from their lack of boundaries may call them selfish. The restoration is peaceful, but its implications are disruptive. They were more comfortable with restraint than restoration. The people had attempted to manage the man with chains. Truth restored him through understanding, separation, and right government. Chain can restrain behavior temporarily, but they cannot produce a right mind. Rules can limit outward expression, but they cannot heal the identity generating it. Fear can force compliance, but it cannot establish inward wisdom. The community knew how to bind the body. Jesus addressed what was governing the consciousness. External control ask, how do we stop this person? Truth ask, what has been governing this person and how can the person be restored? The result exposes the inadequacy of their former method. The chains broke repeatedly, but once the destructive government ended, the man sat peacefully without chains. The man required no external restraint once right government was established within him. This is the movement from law written only outside the person to truth established within the heart. The central revelation of verse 35. Verse 35 shows us the fruit of restorative judgment. The false government bowed. The destructive pattern descended. The collective mindset entered the waters of refinement. The voice that had named the man was choked. And now the man appears restored to visibility, established in stillness, positioned beneath truth, clothed in identity, and sound in consciousness. The lake received what was destroying the man, and the feet of Jesus received the man himself. One entered cleansing, the other entered discipleship. One pattern ended, one life began again. And yet, the community was afraid because liberation does not merely change the captive, it exposes the limitations, investment, and assumptions of everyone who had learned to live around the captivity. Verse 36. They also which saw it told them by what means he that was possessed of the devils was healed. Luke now removes every doubt concerning the meaning of what just happened. He does not describe the man as condemned. He does not describe him as merely restrained. He does not even say that the man has simply become calmer. Luke says he was healed. The ending of the destructive patterns was not punishment against the man. It was the means through which the man was restored. What was choked in the lake was not to be choking the life out of him. What died was not prevented him from living. They also which saw it. These were eyewitnesses of the entire movement. They had observed the man under the government of Legion. Jesus separating the man from the condition. The destructive patterns entering the swine. The herd descending into the lake. And the man sitting, clothed, and in his right mind. They did not merely see the dramatic destruction of the herd. They saw the connection between the end of the pattern and the restoration of the person. This is important because someone arriving afterward might see only the dead swine and conclude something terrible happened here. But those who witnessed the whole process could explain. The destruction you see was a destruction of what had been destroying the man. If we isolate the lake from the restored man, we may mistake refinement for cruelty. But when we observe the complete pattern, we discover that the ending produced healing. This is why context matters. If we isolate fire from purification, isolate judgment from restoration, isolate death from resurrection, isolate the lake from the healed man, or the cross from the transformed life, we may interpret the imagery as divine violence. But the witnesses saw the complete sequence. And Luke tells us the fruit. The man was healed. Next, told them. The witnesses interpreted what the committee had observed. The people saw the man restored, but they did not yet understand what had happened. Therefore, those who had witnessed the process explained it. This reveals the purpose of testimony. A testimony is not merely something amazing happened to me. It explains the movement from captivity to restoration. This is what governed me. This is how it affected my life. This is what truth exposed. This is what had to end. This is how my identity was separated from the pattern. And this is the life that became visible afterward. The witnesses did not merely announce that the swine were gone. They connected the end of the herd with the healing of the man. A mature witness does not glorify the destructive pattern. The witness reveals how truth brought it to an end. Next, by what means? This phrase is astonishing because Luke emphasizes the process. They explain by what means the man was healed. The restoration did not occur through chains. It did not occur through isolation. It did not occur through fear, shame, or condemnation. The community had already tried external restraint. They bound the man, guarded him, and attempted to control his behavior. But the chains could not address the government operating within him. Jesus used another means. Truth entered the place of isolation. The destructive government was confronted. The man's identity was distinguished from the condition. The many patterns were named. Their compatible mindset was exposed. Their direction was allowed to become visible. The false government descended into refinement. Its voice and expression were brought to an end. The man returned to stability, identity, teachability, and sound consciousness. That was the means. The community tried to restrain the expression. Truth addressed the government producing the expression. This is the difference between behavior management and inward transformation. A person may be prevented from acting outwardly while remaining tormented inwardly. Someone can stop speaking about their anger while continuing to rehearse it internally. Someone can temporarily avoid an addictive substance while the wound driving the craving remains untouched. Someone can conform to religious rules while remaining governed by fear, shame, and condemnation. Chains can interrupt expression. Only inward truth can transform government. The method was separation, not identification. One of the most important means of healing was the separation of the person from the pattern. The man said, "My name is Legion." But the narrative eventually describes him as the man out of whom the devils were departed. Truth did not accept his condition as his eternal identity. Jesus did not say, "You are Legion, and therefore you must be destroyed with Legion." Instead, the destructive government departed from him. The man remained. Healing began when truth revealed that what governed the man was not the deepest truth of who he was. This principle is still restorative today. You are not the mistake you made. You are not the wound you experienced. You are not the addiction you developed. You are not the fear you entertained. You are not the bitterness through which you reacted. You are not the diagnosis someone gave you. These conditions must be acknowledged honestly, but they do not have to become the person's name. Accountability says, "This pattern has been operating through me." False identification says, "This pattern is what I am." Truth makes healing possible by separating the two. Next, he that was possessed. The language again reveals that something had taken possession of the man's expression. To possess is to occupy, control, or govern something. Symbolically, the destructive balance had possessed his thoughts, his speech, his movements, his relationships, his sense of identity, his dwelling place, and his ability to live within his house. But possession was not origin. The patterns had occupied territory within consciousness, yet they did not create the man. That is why they could live while the man remained. Whatever possesses consciousness may govern its expression temporarily, but it does not become the source of the person's being. A belief can possess the mind. Bitterness can possess a conversation. Fear can possess a decision. Shame can possess identity. Addiction can possess behavior. An ideology can possess a community. Outrage can possess a social media platform. But when truth exposes the pattern, what took possession can lose possession. Next, of the devils. The plural remains important. This was not one isolated thought. It was a network of mutually reinforcing patterns. For example, a painful experience produces rejection. Rejection produces insecurity. Insecurity produces suspicion. Suspicion produces isolation. Isolation produces bitterness. Bitterness produces further rejection. Soon, it is no longer one conclusion. It has become legion, a structured inner government in which every destructive interpretation fits another. This is also how social media ecosystems can operate. An injury is posted. Anger validates it. Algorithms amplify it. Communities repeat it. Identity forms around it. Anyone offering another perspective is treated as an enemy. The person may believe they are expressing one emotion, while an entire government is operating beneath it. Jesus did not merely silence one visible symptom. Truth dismantled the collective structure. Healing often requires us to examine not only the visible behavior, but the network of beliefs, wounds, rewards, relationships, and environments keeping it alive. Next was healed. Luke could have said the man was delivered, but here, he chooses the language of healing. That word interprets the entire passage. The confrontation was healing. The exposure was healing. The separation was healing. The descent was healing. The lake was healing. The end of the pattern was healing. The restoration of the right mind was healing. Therefore, judgment in this story is not opposed to mercy. Judgment is the discernment that separates what belongs to life from what will destroy life. Restorative judgment does not ask, how can the person be destroyed for having this pattern? It asks, what must be brought to an end so that the person can live? The man's healing required the death of the false government. His restoration required legion to bow. His right mind required the many campaigning voices to lose their authority. His return home required the pattern of isolation to end. His testimony required the false voice that named him to be silenced. The pattern ended because the man was being healed, not because the man was being rejected. The witnesses explained the evidence. The people saw two things. A head had perished. A man had been restored. Without understanding, they might focus only on the loss. But the witnesses explained the relationship between them. What ended in the lake was connected to what had been tormenting the man. This is the same interpretive discipline needed throughout Scripture. We must ask, who is being destroyed? The person or the pattern? What remains after judgment? What fruit does the process produce? Does the person emerge condemned or restored? Does the imagery reveal vengeance or refinement? In this passage, the evidence is unmistakable. The man emerges alive, peaceful, clothed, teachable, mentally sound, and ready to return to his community. The destructive government does not emerge. That is healing. Verse 37. Then the whole multitude of the country of the gatherings ran about, besought him to depart from them, for they were taken with great fear. And he went up into the boat and returned back again. They had just witnessed unmistakable restoration. The man was no longer among the tombs. He was no longer naked. He was no longer driven into isolation. He was sitting peacefully. He was clothed. He was in his right mind. Yet their response was not, teach us how this happened. Show us how others can be restored. Bring this same freedom throughout our community. They asked Jesus to leave. That is astonishing. And to recognize what truth had disrupted. The man's captivity had become integrated into their normal way of life. The keepers fed the swine. The community restrained the man. Everyone had a familiar role within the existing arrangement. Then truth arrived and dismantled the entire ecosystem. Legion lost its vessel. The swine lost their governing impulse. The feeders lost what they were maintaining. The chains became unnecessary. The community's methods were exposed as ineffective, and the man they had learned to manage became free. Truth did not merely change the man, it exposed the system surrounding his captivity. That is why verse 37 mirrors what we still witness today. Examples: fear-based religious systems. A fear-based religious system may depend upon people believing they cannot discern truth for themselves. Questioning is rebellion. Leaders possess access to God that ordinary people do not. Fear is necessary to produce obedience. And leaving the system means leaving the source. Then someone encounters truth and awakens. They say, I can observe the scriptures for myself. I can ask questions without fear. I can distinguish the source from the institution. I do not need terror to live with integrity. Love, truth, wisdom, and compassion can govern me from within. That person becomes like the restored man, no longer requiring the external chains that once controlled them. But instead of celebrating their soundness, the system may label them rebellious, deceived, proud, or dangerous. Why? Because a person established in their right mind is difficult to govern through fear. Systems that depend upon fear will often treat freedom as deception, because awakening removes the chains through which they exercise control. They don't actually want the person physically destroyed. They want the truth awakening the person to live. Next, society and institutions. Some industries and institutions benefit when people remain insecure, addicted, outraged, distracted, divided, ashamed, or constantly dissatisfied. Insecurity sells products. Outrage creates engagement. Fear attracts attention. Addiction produces repeat consumption. Division creates loyal groups. A restored person may consume less, react less, question more, and refuse to let algorithms govern their emotional state. That person's healing threatens an economy built around keeping the swine hungry. If captivity is profitable, liberation will be treated as a disruption. So society may not say, Jesus, leave us. It may say, stop questioning the system. Do not disrupt the narrative. You are becoming difficult. You think too deeply. Why can't you just go along with everyone else? But symbolically, the request is the same. They are saying, truth, depart from our territory, because your presence is changing what benefits us. This can also happen within families. A family may have become accustomed to one person being the scapegoat, the rescuer, the silent one, the financial provider, the person without boundaries, the one everyone blames, or the one expected to absorb everyone else's dysfunction. When that person awakens and says, I love you, but I will no longer participate in this pattern. I will not accept blame for everything. I will not finance destructive choices. I will no longer abandon myself to preserve false peace. The family may not celebrate. They may say, you have changed. You are selfish now. You think you are better than us. Who has been influencing you? This is not how you used to behave. They were comfortable with the former version because that version served the existing arrangement. People who benefited from your lack of boundaries may experience your healing as rejection. They want the truth that taught you to stand in your right mind to live, because your freedom requires the entire family system to adjust. Next, friendships and relationships. Some friendships are built upon shared bitterness, gossip, addiction, insecurity, or mutual avoidance of accountability. When one person heals, they stop supplying the old relationship with its familiar food. They no longer want to rehearse the same grievance, mock the same people, participate in destructive habits, validate every reaction, or confuse agreement with loyalty. The other person may become uncomfortable because the friendship was held together by the pattern, not merely by love. When the pattern dies, every relationship built around feeding it must either transform or separate. The request for Jesus to leave may sound like, you are no fun anymore. You have become too serious. Why are you always questioning everything? Just agree with me. Stop trying to change. Truth is being asked to leave because truth no longer permits the old pattern to be fed. Next, the whole multitude. This phrase is important. It was not merely one swine keeper asking Jesus to depart. The whole multitude joined the request. That reveals collective resistance. A destructive system becomes powerful when many people occupy different roles within it. Some create the fear. Some teach it. Some repeat it. Some profit from it. Some defend it. Some enforce it. And others remain silent because challenging it feels unsafe. When truth exposes the arrangement, the multitude may unite. Not because the system is healthy, but because the system is familiar. That is why the religious leaders and the political leaders united to kill Jesus. Collective agreement does not prove that a pattern is true. Sometimes it only proves that many people benefit from leaving it unexamined. The community could tolerate one man living among the tombs. What they could not tolerate was truth revealing that his condition was neither permanent nor identical with who he was. His restoration raised a dangerous possibility. If this man can be free, perhaps our entire understanding must change. And rather than allowing truth to examine the wider system, they asked truth to leave. Next, they were taken with great fear. Their fear was not evidence that Jesus had harmed the man. The man was visibly restored. Their fear arose because truth had demonstrated an authority greater than their established order. They knew how to bind the man. They did not know how to heal him. They knew how to feed the herd. They did not know what to do when the appetite ended. They knew how to live around captivity. They did not know how to reorganize life around freedom. People may fear truth, not because truth is destructive, but because truth makes the continuation of familiar destruction impossible. This is why awakening can feel lonely. The awakened person thinks, can't you see that I am peaceful now? Can't you see that I am thinking clearly? Can't you see that this has restored my dignity? But those invested in the former arrangement may see something different. We can no longer control you as before. You no longer need what we offered. Your freedom exposes what we're maintaining. Your transformation may awaken others. The restored man is therefore not merely evidence of personal healing. He becomes evidence that the system's chains were never the answer. Next, and he returned back again. Jesus does not force himself upon them. Truth reveals its fruit, but it does not compel the community to welcome it. They request that he leave, and he leaves their immediate territory. Yet truth does not abandon the region without a witness. The restored man remains. And in the following verses, he is sent home to declare what has been done for him. They could ask Jesus to live physically, but they could not erase the evidence of truth. The community rejected the teacher, but the teacher remained embodied in the restored man. They could dismiss an argument. They could resist an explanation, but they still had to live near someone who had been among the tombs and was now in his right mind. The man became living evidence that truth had been there. The central revelation of verse 37. Verse 37 reveals when people, relationships, institutions, and systems benefit from destructive patterns, they may resist the very truth that restores the person. They do not reject truth because its fruit is harmful. They reject it because its fruit threatens the control, profit, identity, belonging, and familiar arrangements built around captivity. They did not ask Jesus to leave because the man remained destructive. They asked Jesus to leave because the man had become free, and his freedom exposed everything that benefited from his captivity. Verse 38. Now the man out of whom the devils were departed besought him that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away. The community asked Jesus to leave because they did not want truth among them. But the restored man responded from the opposite extreme. He wanted to live with Jesus and keep truth close to himself. His desire is understandable. Jesus represented the truth that had found him among the tombs, separated him from legion, restored his identity, returned him to his right mind, and treated him as a human being rather than a condition to be restrained. Naturally, he wanted to remain with the one who had restored him. But Jesus would not allow his awakening to become a private sanctuary. Truth does not restore us merely so that we can remain beside the teacher. Truth restores us so that its life can reach others through us. The man wanted to be with Jesus, but Jesus sent him back to the very people who had asked Jesus to leave. That is beautiful. They rejected truth in one form, so truth returned to them embodied in someone they already knew. They might dismiss Jesus as an outsider. They might ask the teacher to leave their territory, but they could not deny the transformation of the man who had once lived among their tombs. The man wanted truth close to himself. There is a stage of awakening when we want to hold tightly to whatever brought us clarity. We may think, I have finally found truth. I do not want to lose this peace. Let me remain here. Let me stay only among people who understand. Let me separate completely from everyone who rejected it. But Jesus shows that truth is not something we hoard for personal safety. The man could not turn Jesus into his private source of comfort, while the rest of his community remained governed by fear, assumptions, and destructive systems. If truth restored you, its fruit should not end with you. This does not mean forcing truth upon others. Jesus had already respected the community's request and departed. The man was not sent back to debate, condemn, or dominate them. He was sent back to become evidence. Truth is for the people who rejected it too. This is the mercy within the verse. The community said, Jesus, depart from us. Yet Jesus did not say, then they will never encounter truth again. Instead, he left behind a living witness. The same people who feared the man's restoration would now repeatedly encounter him, clothed, peaceful, stable, self-governing, restored to relationship, and living among them again. They rejected their direct encounter, but mercy provided another opportunity through an embodied life. Truth did not punish them for asking truth to leave. Truth found another way to remain accessible to them. Something profound about evangelism. Evangelism is not hoarding revelation. It is not persuading people through pressure. It is not threatening those who refuse to listen. It's allowing the truth that restored us to become visible through the way we live. So Jesus said, let your light shine. He's not asking you to go debate people, go threaten people with hellfire, turn or burn. No. Let your light shine before men. Let the truth that has awakened in you become visible through the way you live. The man wanted to sit permanently at Jesus' feet, but discipleship could not end with sitting. First, he sat and learned. Then, he had to stand and embody. Then, he would return and share. This is a complete movement. Sit at the feet of truth. Become established in your right mind. Rise in restored identity. Return to ordinary life. Let others see what truth produces. If you remain physically beside Jesus, the community might continue believing that restoration belongs only to a distant teacher. By returning home, the man demonstrated that truth could live within a human being and transform everyday life. Jesus did not allow the man merely to follow truth externally. He sent him home to embody it inwardly. Truth is not an exclusive possession. This also confronts the tendency to turn awakening into superiority. I understand what others do not. I have access to truth. I belong beside the teacher. Those people rejected truth, so they don't deserve what I received. But Jesus sent the man directly back to those people. Why? Because the same truth that saw beyond legion in him could see beyond fear in them. The man had once been governed by destructive patterns, yet truth did not define him by them. Now, he must extend that same mercy to a community temporarily governed by fear. We cannot receive a truth that separates us from our condition and then use that truth to permanently identify everyone else by this. The community's fear was not really their final identity, just as Legion was not the man's final identity. He was living proof that people can change when they encounter truth. That is why you don't force awakening on anyone. You don't force change on anyone. When they encounter truth for themselves, they will change. Just live your truth. Let your light shine. Verse 39. Return to thy own house and show how great things God had done unto thee. And he went his way and published throughout the whole city how great things Jesus had done unto him. Jesus does not merely say, return to the house. He says, return to thy own house. Symbolically, this is a return to the self, to the inner dwelling from which the man had been separated. Earlier in Luke 8, verse 27, Luke told us, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs. That makes the movement unmistakable. He left his house and lived among the tombs. Truth found him among the tombs. Truth restored his right mind. Then truth sent him back to his own house. The story is a complete journey of awakening. The word return tells us that the house belonged to him before Legion governed him. Jesus was not sending him somewhere entirely unfamiliar. He was restoring him to what had always been his, but had become inaccessible while destructive patterns ruled his consciousness. That is awakening. Awakening is not becoming an entirely different being. It is returning to the identity that existed beneath every wound, label, assumption, fear, and destructive pattern. Truth does not manufacture your true identity. Truth restores your awareness of it. Legion made the man forget himself. Truth caused him to remember. Next, thy own house. If the human being is the temple, then his own house is his own consciousness, his inward dwelling, identity, mind, emotional world, and embodied life. Legion had displaced him from that house. He was physically alive, but inwardly estranged from himself. His identity was being governed by voices that did not originate from his source. That is why his answer had been, my name is Legion. He had forgotten the difference between himself and what had entered him. But when truth separated the person from the pattern, the man became able to inhabit himself again. To return to your own house is to stop living as a stranger within your own being. It is to recognize, I am not the wound. I am not the fear. I am not the addiction. I am not the failure. I am not the voices that named me. I am not the expired identity among the tombs. I am the living expression that remained when those patterns departed. The devils left the man, but the man did not disappear. What remained was his own house, and now he could live consciously within it. So Jesus is saying, return to yourself. Remember who you are. Re-enter your own consciousness. Live from the identity that truth has uncovered. That's what scripture is about. The sacred text, that's what they're about. To tell you to remember who you are. Because you were created to reflect the Father. That's why you are here on earth. To make the invisible visible. To let the Father be seen through you. Next, show how great things God had done unto thee. The evidence was not merely something the man was supposed to say. His restored life will show it. He would return clothed, peaceful, stable, discerning, relational, self-governing, and in his right mind. The people who remember the tombs will now encounter the house. They remembered the man who could not remain with anyone. Now they will see him able to live among others without being governed by fear, fragmentation, and distraction. His life became the message before his mouth ever explained it. That is why his testimony carried authority. He was not repeating information he had memorized. He was describing a truth he had become. He could say, I know the difference between captivity and freedom because I have lived both. I know legion was not my identity because it departed and I remained. I know the tombs were not my home because truth returned me to my own house. Next, and he went his way. This confirmed that he had recovered agency. Earlier, the devils drove him. Now he went his way. That language matters. Before truth, he was driven. After truth, he went his way. He was no longer being carried by every inner voice, collective appetite, emotional reaction, or destructive impulse. He could now choose his direction consciously. A right mind does not merely stop destructive movement. It restores the ability to walk one's own path deliberately. Jesus did not control every step of the man's future. He restored his capacity to live from truth and then trusted him to walk. Next, throughout the whole city, Jesus told him to return to his own house. Yet the man published the message throughout the whole city. That is not disobedience. It reveals how truth moves from self to house to city. First, the person awakens. Then the household encounters the fruit. Then the restored life begins influencing the wider community. He did not begin by trying to transform the whole city while remaining fragmented within himself. He returned to his own house first. This establishes a beautiful order. Awaken within. Return to yourself. Embody truth in your own life. And let the evidence move outward from there. So the Great Commission is about you first. Work on yourself first. And let the truth awaken in you. Become the evidence. We often want to change society, religion, family, or the world without first examining what governs our own house. But Jesus begins with the person. Return to your own house, not your neighbor's house, not the swinekeeper's house, not the entire city first, your own house. Transformation becomes trustworthy when the message we announce is first embodied privately. Jesus tells him, show how great things God had done unto thee. But Luke says the man declared how great things Jesus had done unto him. This shows complete alignment between the source and its expression. Jesus did not act from a competing nature or independent agenda. What Jesus expressed revealed what God does. What did Peter tell you? God was the one performing the miracles through Jesus, the source. The miracles Jesus did, it was the Father doing them through him. So what Jesus revealed shows what the Father wants. God restores. God separates people from destructive patterns. God returns the fragmented to a right mind. God clothes the exposed with dignity. God brings people out of tombs. God reconciles people with their own house. God transforms captivity into testimony. The man understood the nature of the source through the fruit Jesus embodied. The expression revealed the source. Jesus revealed the Father. The man's entire encounter with Jesus is the Genesis pattern compressed into one human life. See, Moses knew what he was writing. It's a pattern. Moses is not telling you how the universe began. Moses is telling you how awakening begins. Genesis 1 is how awakening begins. Moses is telling you it's a pattern. And everyone eventually experiences it. That's why he gave the name Adam, humanity. So anyone can experience the pattern. Adam, humanity, called their name Adam. Genesis is not describing what happened to one man called Adam. Moses uses Adam, humanity, because the pattern can unfold within anyone. Look at the movement. Genesis 1, light enters the darkness. And God said, let there be light. The man is living among the tombs, surrounded by inner darkness, confusion, isolation, and disorder. Then Jesus, the light of the world, arrives. This is the beginning of creation within him. Jesus does not begin by condemning the chaos. He enters it and reveals what has been governing the man. Just as light made distinction possible in Genesis 1, the presence of Jesus begins separating the man's true identity from the voices occupying his consciousness. Before light, everything is mixed together. After light enters, distinction begins. The man is not the legion. His identity is not his condition. His humanity is not erased by his torment. What governs him can be confronted and removed. Genesis 1 begins whenever light enters a life and reveals that chaos is not the person's original identity. So creation happens anytime someone awakens. Anytime you awaken, Genesis 1 is unfolding in you. Genesis 2, the man is formed again. Genesis 2 gives us the formation of the human being. And the Lord God formed man. After Jesus confronts what has occupied the man, we see inward formation taking place. The man who could not be restrained externally is now being reordered internally. No chains could produce this transformation. No social restraints could restore him. No human system could force him into wholeness. But when truth reaches the government within him, something new is formed. That is why the next image is so powerful. And they come to Jesus and see him that was possessed with the devil sitting. He is no longer wandering among the tombs. He is sitting. There is order. There is stillness. There is rest. There is groundedness. Then the text says he is in his right mind. His consciousness has been restored to proper government. This is Genesis 2 happening within him. Humanity being formed into an ordered living expression again. That's why he said, man became. You already exist. It doesn't say man received. Man became. You only become if you already exist. The man was not merely relieved of symptoms. He was being reformed from within. Genesis 3. Then we are told that the man is clothed. That word cannot be accidental within the pattern. In Genesis 3, Adam and Eve become conscious of their nakedness. And God clothes them before they leave the garden. In the gospel account, this man is also found clothed after his encounter with truth. Clothing represents more than fabric. It speaks of restored identity, dignity, consciousness, and a new way of appearing in the world. Before his transformation, the man wore no clothes. He had lost the covering of coherent identity. His inner fragmentation had become outwardly visible. After encountering Jesus, he is clothed. His humanity has been restored to him. The light revealed him. Truth reformed him. And restored consciousness clothed him. And then comes the part that completes Genesis pattern. In Genesis 3, the clothed human being is sent out of the garden into the world. In the gospel account, the man wants to remain physically with Jesus, but Jesus tells him, go home to thy friends and tell them how great things the Lord had done for thee. He is clothed and then sent. He does not remain at the place of revelation forever. He must carry what has happened within him back into ordinary human life. He returns to his home, his relationships, his community, the city that remembered his former condition, and the people who had known him among the tombs. Just as Adam leaves the garden to enter the field of human experience, this restored man leaves the immediate presence of Jesus and enters the city as a living expression of what truth has accomplished. So we are all Adam, because Adam is humanity. He entered the encounter naked, divided, and living among the dead. He left clothed, whole, conscious, and carried a message of life back to the city. That's Genesis 1, 2, and 3. It's a pattern, awakening. Adam is not the name of one distant individual. Adam represents the human being undergoing the vessel pattern of consciousness, darkness, illumination, distinction, formation, identity, embodiment, and expression. That is why Genesis 5:2 says, call their name Adam. It's not about gender, because awakening is not limited to gender. Males awaken, females awaken. Moses knew what he was writing. That's what Genesis 5:2 says, call their name Adam. It's not about gender. The man among the tombs becomes another Adam, because the Genesis pattern is happening again within him. And that explains why his first assignment was not to build a religion around the encounter. It was to go home. Genesis 3 is commission. It's not exile. The source is saying, now that you have awakened, go awaken others. The Great Commission. That is why Genesis is the foundation. If you misunderstand Genesis, you misunderstand the entire Bible. And that is what happened. Because we did not understand Genesis. We misunderstood the entire Bible and turned awakening into fear. Once you understand Genesis, the entire Bible will open itself to you. Because the first evidence of a new creation is how the renewed person returns to shared life. Jesus restored his humanity and sent him back to humanity as living evidence that lies still create worlds within us. Verse 40, and it came to pass that when Jesus was returned, the people gladly received him, for they were all waiting for him. In verse 37, one committee asked Jesus to depart. In verse 40, another committee gladly receives him because they have been waiting for him. This reveals two mindsets encountering the same truth. The difference was not the nature of Jesus. The difference was the posture of the people. Truth remained the same. Consciousness determined whether truth was rejected or received. One asked Jesus to leave. The gatherings had already witnessed the fruit of truth. They saw a man restored, clothed, peaceful, teaching teachable, and in his right mind. Yet, because his restoration disrupted the system surrounding his captivity, they asked Jesus to leave. Their mindset said, we do not want truth if truth changes what is familiar. We do not want freedom if freedom costs us our established arrangement. We do not want restoration if restoration requires us to examine ourselves. They encountered truth through fear. The other was waiting for him. The people in verse 40 were in another posture entirely. They were waiting. Waiting represents expectation, receptivity, readiness, desire, patience, and inward openness. They had already made room for truth before Jesus returned. One group encountered truth and tried to remove it from their territory. The other prepared its territory for truth before it arrived. The waiting people did not yet know everything Jesus would do. They had not seen the entire next movement, but they were available to receive what truth would reveal. That is faith. Not blind belief, but a receptive willingness to encounter, observe, and learn. Next, gladly received him. They did not merely permit Jesus to remain, they gladly received him. This suggests that truth was not treated as an intruder, an inconvenience, a threat, or an enemy. Truth was welcomed. To receive truth gladly is to say, show me what I have not seen, correct what I have misunderstood, expose what is harming me, restore what has become disordered. I may not know what the encounter requires, but I am willing to observe. The gatherings wanted truth at a distance because it threatened their established system. The waiting people drew near because they recognized the possibility of life. The resistant mind asked, what will truth take from me? The receptive mind asked, what might truth awaken within me? They were all waiting for him. This also contrasts beautifully with the previous whole multitude. In verse 37, the whole multitude asked him to leave. In verse 40, they were all waiting for him. Two collectives, two atmospheres, two forms of agreement. One community collectively reinforced fear. Another community collectively cultivated expectation. This shows us that communities can be organized around entirely different relationships with truth. A family can collectively resist the person who awakens because their freedom disrupts familiar rules. But another family can say, we have been waiting for an honest conversation. We want healing. We are willing to examine the pattern. A religious system can ask truth to leave because questioning threatens its authority. But another community can wait for truth because its members generally desire understanding rather than control. A friendship can reject discernment because it already shares dysfunction. But another friendship can welcome truth because both people value growth above agreement. Some communities unite to preserve captivity. Others unite in readiness for awakening. Waiting is an inward posture. The verse is not merely about people standing physically on a shoreline. Symbolically, wording describes consciousness that has not filled every space with assumptions. It is the ability to pause and say, I will not conclude before truth arrives. I will not let fear decide what something means. I will remain open enough to receive greater understanding. This briefly matches Moses' recurring instruction to observe before concluding. The waiting mind does not rush ahead of truth. It does not decide the answer before the evidence appears. It creates space for revelation. To wait for truth is to resist the urge to let assumptions occupy the place where understanding is meant to arrive. The restored man became the bridge. Look at the sequence. The previous community rejected Jesus, but Jesus left the restored man behind as living evidence. Then Jesus crosses back and is received by people who were waiting. Truth does not stop moving because one group rejects it. Rejection in one territory does not mean truth has been defeated. It means truth continues toward consciousness prepared to receive it. Jesus did not remain trying to force the gatherings to accept what they had rejected. He honored their choice, left evidence among them, and continued. That is important for us too. Sometimes we exhaust ourselves trying to persuade people who have already asked truth to leave, while others are waiting for the very clarity we carry. Do not mistake one community's rejection for proof that your message has no place. Somewhere, another consciousness is waiting for it. These two communities can also represent two postures within the same person. There are areas of our lives where we gladly receive truth. We say, show me how to grow. Help me understand. I am ready to change. And there are other areas where we say, do not touch this belief. Do not question this relationship. Do not expose this habit. Do not disturb this identity. Leave this territory as it is. We may welcome truth in our spirituality, but reject it in our finances. We may welcome truth concerning other people, but resist it concerning ourselves. We may desire freedom from pain, while rejecting the truth that challenges the pain producing it. So verse 40 invites us to ask, where within me am I waiting for truth? And where within me am I asking truth to live? For generations, many have read this story and concluded that Luke 8 is primarily teaching humanity how to identify invisible beings, confront demons, and perform exorcisms. And when a symbol is mistaken for a literal instruction, the consequences do not always remain inside a sermon. Real people have been restrained. Real people have been beaten. Real people experiencing trauma, mental distress, neurological conditions, grief, addiction, or psychological crisis have been frightened, isolated, shamed, and subjected to horrifying practices, all because someone decided that their suffering was evidence of an imaginary being that had been violently driven out of them. But observe Jesus. The people around this man had already tried chains. They had already tried restraint. They already treated him as someone to contain rather than someone to understand. They had driven him away from shared life until the only place left for him was among the tombs. And yet, when Jesus encountered him, Jesus did not destroy the man. He distinguished the man from what governed him. That distinction changes everything. The man was not legion. He was not his torment. He was not his fractured thoughts. He was not the voices speaking through his pain. The man was still there, beneath everything that occupied his consciousness. And Jesus addressed the government without condemning the human being. Truth does not confuse the person with the condition governing them. This is why the story ends, not with the man bruised, terrified, humiliated, or physically broken, but to him sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. That is the fruit. Peace, dignity, clarity, restoration, relationship, right-mindedness. Luke 8 is not inviting us to become hunters of invisible enemies. It is teaching us to recognize the inner governments that can occupy human consciousness. Fear can become a legion. Shame can become a legion. Trauma can become a legion. Inherited beliefs can become a legion. Self-rejection can become a legion. The voices of everyone who told you that you were unworthy can become a legion. 1,000 conclusions can speak through one wounded identity until the person no longer remembers their own voice. This is why Solomon could say, "There is no new thing under the sun." Moses described the path in Genesis. The prophets encountered it in their generations. Jesus revealed it in human lives. The apostles explained its inward transformation. And we continue expressing it today. There is nothing new under the sun. What happened then is still happening. The names change. The cities change. The clothing changes. The medical language changes. The religious language changes. But the path remains. Darkness still needs light. Chaos still needs distinction. The wounded still need compassion. The fragmented mind still needs restoration. The isolated still need to return to community. And the human being buried beneath all those governing voices still needs to remember, you are not the tomb in which you have been living. You are not the chains people placed upon you. You are not the voices that occupied your consciousness. You are not the worst condition through which others have known you. The evidence of awakening is not how dramatically we describe the darkness. It is the peace, clarity, dignity, and compassion that become visible after light has entered. Perhaps this is why the people were afraid. They had learned how to manage the man's disorder with chains, but they did not understand the consciousness that made the chains unnecessary. They were comfortable identifying him by his condition. His resurrection disrupted the identity that assigned to him. And this still happens. Sometimes, people know how to relate to our wounds, but do not know how to relate to our wholeness. They know the version of us who lived among the tombs. They remember the version who could be controlled through shame. They understand the version who doubted themselves. But when truth restores us, when we begin sitting in peace, clothed in dignity, and speaking from a right mind, our transformation confronts the assumptions of everyone who benefited from our fragmentation. Yet Jesus does not ask the man to prove himself to them. He sends him home to embody what has happened. That is awakening. Awakening is not fighting imaginary beings. It is light entering what was dark. It is truth exposed what was governing us. It is consciousness being reordered. It is identity being restored. It is dignity covering what shame had left naked. It is the mind returning to coherence. It is the human being leaving the tombs and returning to shared life. And this is why symbolic reading matters. It does not make scripture less real. It reveals just how real scripture has always been. Scripture is real. It's talking about human consciousness. It brings the story out of a distant world of fantasy and places it within the human experience. Before we look at another suffering human being and label them possessed, perhaps we should first ask, what pain have they carried? What happened to them? What voices have shaped their identity? What support do they need? What would help restore their dignity? How can we participate in bringing them back into safety, clarity, compassionate care, and shared life? Because the purpose of truth is not to make us more suspicious of human beings. It is to make us more capable of seeing the human being beneath the condition. Jesus did not turn the community against the man. He freed the man from what already separated him from the community. Luke 8 is therefore not a manual for cruelty in the name of deliverance. It is a revelation of liberation. It reminds us that no matter how long a person has lived among the tombs do not possess the final word. No matter how many voices are speaking, the true human being has not disappeared. No matter how many chains have failed, restoration remains possible. No matter how chaotic the inner world has become, light can still say, "Let there be light." and a new creation can begin. Scripture is not teaching us to fear imaginary beings. Scripture is teaching us to awaken, to remember who we are, to remember why we are here. And wherever light enters darkness, truth confronts false government, dignity replaces shame, and a human being rises from among the tombs. And Genesis begins again. Thanks for being here, and I will see you in the next teaching. Have a good night.